Good morning, everybody. We're delighted to be here. It's lovely to see so many people in person because we've missed seeing humans for a long time. And it's great to have all of you here. We are going to talk today about transformative agreements and how do you, and really we want this to be a discussion on how do you evaluate them and what do you do pre and post evaluation. So we're going to cover the OA landscape really quickly, then we're going to talk about pre and post strategies. We're going to use some use cases, and then we're going to look at some data, looking at dimensions of the database to evaluate some of the landscape as it pertains to your particular institution. For the people that got here a little bit earlier today in the session, I asked to raise your hand if this is your umpteenth OA transformative session at this conference. So congratulations, you've made it. We don't have stars to give out, but we think this is the best session. So what is the OA landscape today? Unlike Europe, in the US, we're catching up, so hence that visual on the screen. The world is still fractured in the US because we don't really have a proper mandate. We have a guidance, but we don't have a mandate for OA. But I think this is a good place to start between librarians, between publishers, to really look at our future and see an OA future. And with that, I'm going to go first to Curtis, who's going to talk about, oh, it's Joel first, sorry, about the pre and then post Curtis.
Yeah, I think one of the major things that we look at in terms of evaluating OA agreements is what value are you receiving in return for what you're paying. And I think that's the essence of OA agreement evaluation. And as you look at this chart here or table, these are some of the many factors that you might want to consider as you evaluate those agreements pre and post. And one of the things that Curtis and I'll do is that we'll share our insight into how we approach pre and post analysis. And you'll see two very different institutions on a continuum. University of Utah, lightly invested in open access agreement. Iowa State University, heavily invested, but hopefully you can see yourself somewhere on that continuum. Now, one of the key points here is that you don't need 100 different metrics in order to evaluate OA agreements. One of the things you have to do, though, is identify a core set and that makes sense for your institution. So a few variables to analyze pre-agreement are publisher profile, author behavior, estimated cost of APCs in the wild, incremental costs associated with transitioning to OA agreements, and then lastly, the value received. Now, I'll talk about a couple of these, but I won't go into detail on all of them. When we talk about publishing profile, this ultimately is what this is all about. It gives you an identity in terms of where your publication output is derived. And the second thing it does is that it aids in selecting agreements that make the most sense from your campus, from a financial standpoint, from an author perspective, from administratively. And as you look at the used research output, you'll see that it's concentrated with 10 publishers, and a lot of research libraries have a similar type of profile. It's just the numbers are different. And as you see in row 8, 41% of the used output is closed, and that's kind of the starting point or the basis for what we hope to transition to open. Now, there's a discussion about, there's all forms of OA, but I'm specifically focused on read and publish. And one of the things that people don't understand is that it's not about cost containment, okay? That's one thing you have to understand, because it's more about the publishers driving incremental revenue. That's what it's about. Whether you like it or not, that's what it's about. And ultimately, it drives cost on our side. So as you look at row 11, or column 11, that's 675,000. That's what it would cost us today if we were to transition to OA for 6 of the top 10 publishers that are listed there. Okay? So again, you don't see cost containment there, right? You see cost runaway. Okay? That's what you see. But that's why we have to be very selective in terms of the agreements that you choose to transition and the ones that make the most sense for you as a campus. Now let's talk about post agreement performance. And I think one of the keys here is that you need to understand why reality differed from what was expected. And then that'll help you determine what corrective action you need to make. So a few baseline metrics. One is the shift in output mix. And that's mostly between hybrid and closed, and that's columns 2 and 5. The second one to look at is the change in percent of OA, and that's column 8. And over time, you'd expect to see that increase in column 8, okay? And then the third thing that's not actually up there are conversion rates, okay? And that's the ratio of authors that choose to publish. And if the rates are lower than expected, you have to consider doing some author discovery. Asking questions about, well, are people aware of the agreement? Do they think it's a pain to choose OA? What is their attitude towards OA? Is there a problem with the author interface? So those are things post agreement that are beneficial to analyze. And this here is this analysis will help you answer two questions. One is the ultimate question is how much value are you receiving in return for what you were paying? That's ultimately what it's all about. It's not about, hey, I hear institution A is doing such and such, I want one too, just like it, okay? It's got to make sense for you, all right? So we use pre-agreement analytics to calculate the following. One is the incremental OA transition cost, and that's row C, okay? The second thing is the value received, which is row G, and that represents the difference between the cost that would be incurred without an open access agreement, which is row F, and the incremental OA transition cost, which is row C. So in this example, you'll see the 3-year savings of value, the 3-year cost savings or value received of approximately $900,000. Okay, and those are the kinds of discussions that you want to have on campus, within the library, in terms of whether or not these provide enough value for you to transition to. And these are the four agreements that we have in place at the U that support OA publishing. And we made small investments right now to gain a level of understanding, but we are exploring other agreements as things continue to evolve. And that's where that publication profile comes in at, because it gives you a full snapshot of all the major agreements in place, and then you can decide which one is best for you. So now Curtis will now share his process at our statement.
Okay.
Okay.
I think I can dance.
Okay.
Yeah, you can in there too.
Well, good morning, everyone. So I'm going to cover some of the same train that Joel just did, and show some of the data and some of the visuals that we use to do the same sorts of things. So looking at pre-negotiation, developing a strategy. And I'm sure for some of you, a pie chart like this is probably, hopefully, starting to look familiar. I got the idea for doing a pie chart like this from Ralph Schimmer at the Max Planck, where Adam's from here. And what this pie chart shows, it's basically a visual of that publishing profile. So these are our top 25, and it's color-coded to show our progress in making agreements. So the gray pie slices are existing subscription agreements. The salmon color are where we have made an open access agreement, and the gold is a pure OA publisher that we're actually not paying for it, because we are paying for plots, we are paying for frontiers, but we're not paying for NDPI and some of the others. So I think this is really helpful for libraries. I think it's a really helpful visual, and you can just do this out of dimensions, or you could do it out of Web of Science, and you could just get your top 25, and you could put it into a pie chart and start mapping your own progress and see relative to one another quite quickly, you know, how much publishing is happening where. And what you're going to find is that usually there's 5 publishers that make up about 50% of your overall output. So when we're thinking about analyzing performance, this is a work in progress, I have to say. So this is just a spreadsheet that shows at a point in time during the year, we pulled out, you know, how many articles are we actually doing underneath the different agreements. You know, and it's messy, and I would not exactly say you should do it this way, because one of the problems is we're trying to split out like what a published cost is. You know, in some of these agreements, there's a very clear read fee and a publish fee that actually makes sense to the publishing output. Sometimes it's totally arbitrary. It just seems like the publisher just is calling some piece of it a publish fee. So if you're going to plug that publish fee in and try and do some math on how much it's costing per article, it may not make a lot of sense. But it's something, it's a starting point. So we're trying to pull the data that we have together in multiple times throughout the year to see how they're doing. One of the main things we're worried about is for any capped agreement, you know, is it running hot? Are we publishing a lot more than was projected? Because that could lead to either having to pay more money to finish out the year, or, which we try to avoid at all costs, having an agreement that all of the OA spending is done by November, and so if you happen to submit later in the year, sorry, we're not going to cover your article. We have not put anybody in that position on our campus. We won't make an agreement that puts somebody in that position, because if you're an author, you're making a submission decision, you review as you can on our website where all of the agreements are, and you say, okay, we're gonna submit to Wiley because the library has an agreement, it's gonna make it OA, and then if it hits December and like the publishing wouldn't cover it, and then it's like, sorry author, we kind of did a bait and switch on you, and it's not gonna we don't want to do that, and we don't do that. But I think that as you make more agreements and you start looking at how the publishing has happened throughout the year, you know, then we're pulling in cost per use, and we're still trying to pull all this together and get at what is the value, what is the performance. And as I said, it is definitely still a work in progress. And you'll see this is on a spreadsheet. Ideally what we want to do is we want to pull all this into a centralized dashboard where we can do all of that. And I will say that that's also a work in progress. We haven't found something that would do that for us, so we just have lots of spreadsheets. So something else I thought, there's so many of us that are using the now monopoly ILS Alma. I thought I'd tell you a little bit about what we're doing with Alma to try and get at some interesting reporting on what we're doing with OA. So with the third reporting code in Alma, we just went through a project and we just defined a whole bunch of new categories for all these different types of OA agreements. And why did we do that? Well, because we want to get at tracking our spending. And so now we can just pop into Alma and run a report and just see, well actually you got to run a report, you just got like the little widget set up. And we can see the breakdown of spending across the different types of OA agreements. Now this is also a total work in progress, and it's like how you slice and dice these things. You know, we started out listing out all the different types of agreements, and if we have 20 OA agreements, we probably wanted to put them in like 13 different buckets because they're all somewhat unique. But what we really needed to do was just consolidate that down into like 6 or 7 or 8 categories. But what you can see here is what we're mostly doing, or what we're calling read and published capped agreements, where there is some sort of limit on how much of it. But you can see down here in the very, very smallest pie slice, which saddens me to look at it, that subscribed open, which is probably the most equitable in our favorite model. You know, we're doing a lot of subscribed open, but they're all teeny tiny. And so that adds up to a whopping 1% of our OA spend. And this represents about $2 million. So we've transitioned, of our $6 million journal spend, we've transitioned about $2 million of it to different types of OA agreements. So those are some ideas of some of the things that we're doing. as I said, again, this is new to us. We're trying to figure out how to use tools like Alma to start, paying attention to this new type of spending that we're doing, but I think there's still a lot of things to learn, and we'll be adjusting as we go. And Arda?
Yes, so when we talk about preparing and putting together whatever your mission, institution-driven mission is on those agreements with particular vendors, it's very important to apply metrics and to understand the landscape of where your institution is and look at the trend either at a 5-year rate or a 10-year rate or even a comparison of a full year. And that is where a tool like Dimensions or Web of Science come into play, because they help get you those, that data gives you a really quick snapshot view of where you are and where you're headed. In this particular scenario, I'm really going to focus on Dimensions. But some of the things that you could do really quickly it takes less than, it literally is a search via the analytical views and Dimensions. You could look at your footprint by the breakdown in the various flavors of OA that you have as an institution. For this particular case, I've picked on Iowa State, but you could do it for any institution, and you could do it comparatively to any other peer institution of yours. Or you could look at it entirely as a region. So if you wanted to look overall in the US, and how do you then compare to your peers above you, your peers current, and your peers below you in the output of OA for your institution. And so you could look at both the closed and the totality of the OA agreements. You could then break them down by particular, in this particular case here, we're looking at the government funders, because I wanted to look at the OSTP guideline. I don't want to call it a mandate because it isn't. It's just a guideline at this point. So in Dimensions, you could really narrow down by a government funder. And we're actually working in compiling the full totality of that list, because while we have the major groups created for the major agencies, we're now going to have a filter where you could filter by your own state and look at all of the government funders that would be impacted by the OSTP memo. So for the University of Iowa State, on the one line there on the heat map, you see the output of articles, and then at the very top you see those agencies listed. You can run this analysis also to look at what the spread is by publisher. So you can look at, who are your top publishers with whom you are mostly publishing away, but you could do the same analysis for closed, because that is going to tell you who then is going to be impacted. And then we have embedded WasViewer in our analytical tool. It will yield you results for up to 25,000 records at a time that you can analyze and compile the visualizations for. But you can grab this data and build your own dynamic dashboard if you wanted to give you information in real time, up to date, to feed into then your leadership or team as you're making those decisions about where you are. And because I worked at a publisher before I joined digital science, I know that publishers are also looking at this very same data when they prepare to talk with you. So it's only fair that you are equally prepared when you talk back to them. And with that, I think we purposefully left enough time, because I know you're going to have questions. And my brilliant colleagues here we're ready to have a really proper discussion on what are the challenges and what are the questions that you might have about your own OA planning process. And I can walk around with this little microphone if I could just. Who was first?
So can you hear me? So without mine, it's fine.
Up to you.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Jing Guo from Florida International University. Thank you for the presentation, and really, really helpful. So I was wondering whether when you're assessing this OA publishing, Have you all get some kind of feedback from your faculty members regarding the OA publishing? How do they look at the value of OA? Thank you.
I'll come back to you for this, don't worry.
I think everything that I showed today is, more for internal decision-making. So we're not going out and presenting to departments about, some of the things that I showed. What we do try and share with faculty is the progress toward this transition. So probably 4 years ago, 5 years ago, we, in preparing to try and transition to spin, we knew we had to get stakeholder buy-in. So we took that out to the faculty, all the way out to our full faculty senate, and got a unanimous endorsement of new principles that said, as a land-grant university, we will prioritize open access in our negotiations. So we've brought them along. How we report out and communicate to them, we haven't solved that either. I mean, for the most part, they're so busy, it's hard to get on their dance card and get their attention. We have a faculty advisory board that I regularly update on the progress of our open access work. We talk to the provost, we keep him in the loop. I'm probably overdue to go to faculty senate and give an update on everything, but with the pandemic and everything that's going on in Iowa, it's really hard to even get 5 minutes at a faculty senate meeting at Iowa State. But I think it's important for us to tell them. And so where they mostly encounter what's happening with open access through our agreements is when they submit to a publisher where we have an agreement. And we hear such positive reports, they love it. So when they can go out and they just encounter, an ability to pay open access, we haven't had, one author like say, why are you doing this? Why are you spending this money in that way? So mostly we hear all positive things. When we do hear things, we could probably do a better job of trying to figure out how to, report out on the progress. So I think all of us know it's kind of difficult sometimes to do that with faculty.
The other piece of it I think that is very important is author discovery. And one of the things we do is that we do individual interviews with authors who have either published OA or some of our more prolific authors to kind of understand, the mix of their publishing, because some publish open access, some publish closed, and to try to understand the rationale behind their behaviors. And in those interviews, they uncover some very insightful information. One of the things that is challenging is communication. Because a lot of them say, well, I didn't know. I didn't know until the time of acceptance that this was an option. Some say, when I first saw it, I thought it would be a pain, or I didn't think it was real, or things of that nature. So as you uncover those things through those discussions, that helps us think about how do we need to improve our process in order to enhance their process, because ultimately it's about how do we make it as seamless as possible for our authors, because the more complicated it is, the less likely they'll want to deal with it.
Yeah, so I think Joel touched on what I'm asking is the workflow around submitting for OA, right? And how clear is it to potential authors, your faculty, and then with the capped, what happens if you've already reached the limit with a particular publisher? How is then the author, let's say they intend to publish this open access, how are they notified that it's capped? And what happens at that point?
So with the capped agreements, we haven't hit the cap yet. I guess we hit it once with Wiley, our first year of our Wiley agreement. That was during the pandemic surge of articles that came out. And that was one where Wiley actually worked with us. We did have to put in a little bit of extra money to make it through the year, and they matched that. So we put in half, and Wiley covered the other half to do it. But we're very cautious now, about making an agreement that's not going to make it through to the end of the year. So we don't really have to deal with that situation very often. As far as the submission workflow for the authors, that's something that is really, really key. Because something you'll pay attention to in looking at, and I don't think we've totally mentioned this, but the opt-out. And authors will get confused sometimes during like a messy submission workflow. They may think that they're going to be on the hook for paying an APC if they decide to publish it open. And I don't know if anyone from the UC system's here, but they're encountering that with their split payer model, where the opt-out percentage is way higher than they thought it was going to be. So authors are getting confused about it. So one thing we do is we want, when we're negotiating, we want to actually look at that workflow and just, so they'll walk us through and show us screenshots of it so we can look at it and see it. And then we look to see how they're actually doing, what percentage of authors are opting out for some reason. If there's a lot of them, then it's a reason to go back and review that again and have a conversation with the publisher about why that might be happening. And then also with educating the authors on campus. And we do that, I mean, through our website, through department meetings that the liaisons have talking about all of this. And I think there's a lot more awareness on our campus now that the library does do this. So when they encounter, you know, through a submission that this is going to be published open access, you know, it's not a surprise, and hopefully they don't feel like it's something that's going to be a bait and switch where they're going to be on the hook for an APC. But
Well, it raises like two issues in my mind, like the author affiliation during the submission, and is there a way maybe at some point to notify the library, you know, like in some cases? I don't know if that already happened.
there's some where the workflow, there's a verification that happens. So you will see that something has been submitted, and then you have to actually approve it and verify it. Those are typically all of the cap ones. So if you have a cap, you want to make sure that you're only getting charged for articles that are from your folks. So there is a workflow for that.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I wanted to add also that you can track author affiliations inside Dimensions because it really loads both on the preprint and the print. I mean, cross-track, we get most of the data from there. So the university affiliation is something that we have in the author profiles of the collection as well. So you can actually parse the data in there by the authors that you have prolific in both OAE and closed journals. So you could track those, the network of those people as well.
And in terms of the UX, you know, publishers are at different stages in terms of how mature or sophisticated their UX is related to it. One of the things you want to think about though is always ease of use, okay? And the other piece of it is being able to reduce the friction. You know, sometimes libraries have a tendency to want to be in the middle of it, and I understand it. But as you think about the process, think about it from the author's perspective, and identifying the ways to reduce the friction. You know, because and again, people have different thought processes about it. But my thing is that, you know, I'd rather stay out of it if it makes the most sense for me to stay out of it. Okay.
Thank you. I'm Anna Gaskin from Taylor Francis. I'm really interested in what your perspectives on authors submitting and that user experience for hybrid journals, and whether it's helpful to tell them at the time of submission that there may be a deal available, or whether it's better to wait until acceptance and when they've got to make a decision. I don't know whether that time period during peer review gives you an opportunity to work with them to make that decision, or whether actually it just adds some confusion and it's better to wait. It's a question publishers are constantly trying to work out what that best user experience is.
From my perspective. You know, again, ideally, the less decisions that the author has to make, the better. And I think the earlier that the author has the information in terms of what the options are, the better. You know, but then again, there's always reasons in terms of why they choose not to publish OA. You know, and I've seen it. Okay, we have an agreement, the APC is covered or whatever. Why are you choosing this? And a lot of it goes to the misunderstanding. And the other piece of it is that it happens so late in the process that, you've already, it's already taken 15 months to get it through the cycle. And then if I choose this other thing, it'll probably take me another 15 months. That's what the thought process is, and in the conversations that I've had, so.
I was just going to mention, I think this brings up something we haven't talked about, which is the corresponding author situation. And so when we're talking about which articles we're paying for, we're talking about the ones that are coming from the affiliations with our institution, and our author is the corresponding author. And there's a lot of reasons why that is, but it is messy, and it leads to, situations where groups of authors are becoming a little more wily about all of this, and they'll say, if there's a OA agreement at this institution, then we want to have, that co-author submit, because then it'll be covered under this agreement. You'll have authors find out, at some point on this cycle that, if they don't have the agreement at their institution, but the author is there, that same exact situation. So we'll sometimes get contacted by authors who maybe, we just had one where the person left 2 years ago, and he's working at another institution, but the work was done at Iowa State. There's still a grad student who's at Iowa State, but the author who left is the corresponding author. And it's like, so should we cover that? So this whole corresponding author thing is really tricky. And I think when you only have, some institutions with agreements with some publishers, I think it's a problem. I think as everyone has agreements with publishers, then that kind of jockeying for position isn't such a big deal. But I think the corresponding author thing is, it's messy, and it causes some weird incentives. Adam's got one over there.
Thank you. Adam Dale from the Armstrong Digital Library. I could argue with you, Curtis. We also have a couple of 20-something transformative agreements and 8 fully open access agreements, as well as other things. And we see thousands of articles coming through our system, and our team are verifying. And this problem of corresponding authorship, that authors or co-authors telling them, okay, you have an agreement that's published to your institutions, we rarely see that happen, because I think corresponding authorship, it's not just for administrative purposes, then you are also the senior author, and it's also a status, and I think the PIs are usually the ones serving in the corresponding author. So therefore, I we see, I don't know, our team processes 20,000 articles a year, and it's only just a couple of those papers where we see that happen. And the other thing I wanted to argue about, sorry about that, is that your case with the affiliation of the researcher who left, and this is why also in the community recommendations from the ESEC initiative, we always say that the affiliation that counts, it should be the affiliation of the author in the paper as it is on the paper, and not when they submit it or something, but on the published version of record. And that is just a good scientific practice, I think, that you name your affiliation where the research was carried out. And even we see, our researchers tend to move around and affiliate at universities and things like that, but then we see an article where the affiliation on the paper is a Max Planck Institute, then we found it then verify it, because it shows that the research was carried out at our institute, and this is what we are funding through our agreements.
I'm going to go to Laurel.
Yeah, please go.
She's right next to you.
I did an informal survey of a lot of people, and I do feel that corresponding author role switching around is dependent on discipline. So that is true in some disciplines and in some, let's say lab cultures, or some people feel strongly about it and some people do not care. So when I'm helping faculty and they're in a panic state, I sometimes suggest considering switching the role. when I put on my hat of budgeting, I think, ooh, I don't want everybody to choose us, so that I don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, I don't know if you already, like, if I didn't understand something, but let's say, it's probably a rare case with dual appointments, let's say faculty is working at 2 different institutions, and, you know, how do they know that, let's say, your institution has signed this OA agreement and it might be favorable, and how do they weigh those options?
Yeah, so it's on, based on, the email address they're using. So if they have a dual appointment and they're using the wrong one, and they find out they thought they were gonna be covered, but they used the wrong one, it can lead to that situation. And Adam, I don't think there's any argument with any of these. I think the European situation where there's so many agreements across so many institutions, perhaps the co-authors that your authors are using, it doesn't matter because there's just such a density of agreements that they're gonna be covered no matter who's the corresponding author. And the other thing I would say, that particular instance that I talked about where the author left, what happened there is he knew that we had the agreement, but then he submitted using his new university ID from, I don't know if he was from Georgia, where he was, his email address. And so then when he was told he couldn't publish under the agreement, then he came back to us. So these types of conversations, though, are really great. Like, that was just a fantastic conversation, both with him and with the lab at Iowa State that he was, because he had like 6 co-authors on that paper. So we had a chance to like educate that entire group of folks in that lab about how these things work. So it was actually a good thing.
And one thing to remember, we place caveats on everything, okay? Because these are just our experiences. Your experiences may be different, okay? Which is why we come together to have this conversation.
They're responding the best. Another Adam.
Thank you. As Adam Chesler from EIP Publishing, not to be confused with Adam Barrett from last time. He's the one with the hair. What weird talking to people you can't see. The conversation has been focused a lot on the published component, the author experience, talking about the value or the path for getting authors to publish their content away. What I'm curious about are how you evaluate the read portion, because when you talk about a read and publish deal, there's a component of content associated with this that's not open access. But still, I assume, has to be evaluated in some way. You have to determine, am I getting good value for this content? Because there could be thousands of articles which are not open access, because this switch is not fully happening yet. We're in a trend, and even in the title of the presentation today is about transformative, you're transforming. So I'm curious, has that changed? Is it a part of the thought process? Is it shoved to the side? How do you think about the read portion when you think about the value of these deals in a comprehensive way?
I don't know. No, I think that's a very good question. Because to me, and again, different perspective, right? I don't have a tendency to get bogged down into the read portion, or breaking it down that way, right? Because really, to me, it's about what's the overall total cost of the agreement, and how is that relative to what others are paying, so to speak, in terms of fair market values. That's kind of one way to look at it, is what are other similar institutions paying for similar types of content. The other thing is that, and I'll be nice to publishers in here, is that it's kind of beside the point. And the reason I say that is because there's spin that they have, And right now, the way the pricing model is, it's just about generating that incremental spend. So if you're in a historically bad deal and it's being evaluated, you know, with incremental revenue, incremental cost to us, then that's kind of where you are. But you know, it's kind of historically what you've been paying with the add-on on top of that. Now, I'm not saying that's the right thing, but that's the way the pricing model is for that particular type of agreement. Do we actually like that? No, not really, because what you would like to see is a recalculation of what those baseline costs are. Because right now, you know, the escalators that we have are they're infinite, right? So 10 years from now, we'll go from $1 million to $1 billion in cost, just because of the way the pricing is, with no end in sight. And I think that's something that, you know, we'll have to think about collectively, because, you know, that can't continue. That's something that's been going on for how many ever years and stuff. But it is problematic, you know, and I think we have to find a way to be able to address that collectively. And I understand that the publishers have to make money as well. Not really, but that's what they're doing stuff, because, you know, the infrastructure that they have in place. So let me stop.
We're almost at time. We're over time. So I am so sorry, because we could go at this for another hour.